The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jason Weller with the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. Hopefully, you're here for the Get to Know Your McKinney Vento Homeless Education Partners webinar that the coalition is pleased to host this afternoon. Hopefully, all of you have come out of the HUD-NOFA fugue state and are still thinking clearly. But I think this session will be fairly, it has a lot of good information, but it should be fairly low key given everything that most of you have had to deal with the last couple of weeks. So we thank you for taking your time out of the on this Friday afternoon to join us. So we're joined by a panel of three presenters from the Department of Education. We have Pam Keislow, who's the state coordinator for homeless education with the Michigan Department of Education. Abby Jordan, who's the McKinney Vento District Liaison grant coordinator for the Traverse City Area Public Schools. And last but not least, Julie Radican is the Homeless Youth Service Manager. Don't try saying that 6 times fast for the Wayne Metro Community Action Agency. So welcome to all three of you. Thank you for taking time out this afternoon to present on this material. Before we get started, though, a few housekeeping things. The panelists have put together some downloads, or I should say some handouts, which are available. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar platform that we use, on your right-hand side, there should be a couple of controls. One of those should be handouts, and there might be a little triangle pointed to the right side of the screen. Just click on that. It should open up, and there should be 3 PDF documents listed there, and you are welcome to download those. And one of those is the PowerPoint, and then 2 of those are handouts, which the panelists will be referencing. And the other point of reference for kind of housekeeping stuff is that, of course, everybody's microphones are muted. So if you do have a question, the best and easiest thing to do is use, again, the control panel that's on the right-hand side of your screen, and go ahead and click on that and then type in your question. If it's something that you only want me to see, then click on Send Privately. If it's a question that you're comfortable with the entire audience seeing, then hit Send to All. It's that basic. And we would ask that because the panelists are going to be covering a fair amount of content breadth-wise, the easiest thing to do is if you have questions about specific slides that they're presenting on, go ahead and ask the question at that time rather than waiting to the end, because there are a fair amount of slides. Otherwise, if you have kind of like a big picture question, go ahead and put that out there. But I might just table it until we get to the end, and then we can unmute everybody's unmute all the panelists' microphones and let them respond collectively. Otherwise, if you're having issues with either audio or difficulty seeing the screen, unfortunately, and this happens from time to time, unfortunately, the best thing to do is actually log out, log back in. Normally, it's a connection issue, and it's not something to do with the webinar itself. So hopefully I've covered all the basics. And now, before I hand things over to Pam, and she's going to start things off and give the overview, we actually have a couple of poll questions that we wanted to put out there so that we got a sense of who's joined us today, and also give the presenters an opportunity to perhaps tailor the messaging a little bit. So first off, go ahead and launch the poll now. Yeah, thank you, Pam, for playing along. So the first question is, what type of agency do you work with? So we're only a couple seconds in now, give you about another 45 seconds or so to respond. Also see if we can get a good number of the folks who are on today's call to give them a chance to respond. All right. All right, well, we're getting there. We're in the 80%. Give folks maybe another 10 seconds or so. You got to put down your sandwich. You got to click on the thing. I understand it's a process. All right. Hasn't moved in a couple. And all right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So, okay. So we have some varied. I mean, not surprisingly, because we advertise pretty heavily with COCs and homeless service providers. Just under half of the folks are either with a housing agency or a homeless service agency. 6% with mental health, almost a quarter with the schools or in education in some capacity, and then another quarter with other social service providers. Okay, thank you. And now we have one more poll. I know we're front loading stuff here. And this is also to give the presenters kind of a better context of where all of you are coming from. So I'll go ahead and launch the poll question. So from your experience, what do schools and Continuum of Cares, or for those of you who are in the balance of state, your local planning bodies, have in common? And I'll give folks that, please note this with this one, you can have multiple answers. So it's multiple choice, but you can click on multiple things. So because of that, I know folks will probably have to think through it a little bit longer. So give you like a minute and a half or so to respond to this one as opposed to the 45 seconds we typically give people. Okay, wow, whoa. All right. Over 3/4 of you have responded already. All right, this is good. And I'm I'm seeing, this is like democracy in action. I'm seeing the polling results immediately as people are voting, and these are some pretty interesting perspectives. All right, so I'll give you another 5 seconds to get answers in, and then I'm going to close the poll, and then we'll share the results with everybody. 3, 2, 1. All right. Wow. So this is pretty cool. So 83% feel that the COC or local planning bodies and schools are sharing clients. Half of you see the groups as sharing the McKinney Vento law. 40, just under 40% offering similar types of services, and almost all of you referring clients for additional assistance. And perhaps most impressively of all, this is perhaps a comment on the savviness of this group that's participating in the webinar today. Nobody said there was nothing. So very, very interesting. Thank you for participating. And I'll go ahead and hide that. And Pam, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you'll forgive my nasally voice. I have that seasonal crud that's going around, and I will try not to cough on you through my microphone. Excuse me. I wanted to let you know, let's see if I'm on the right slide here. Nope, I guess I am. I wanted to let you know that the state coordinator for homeless education has specific duties within the McKinney Vento Act about collaborating and coordinating with homeless service providers. And a lot of that means that we're working with all of you and your organizations, as well as other community groups that you can see on the screen and other agencies, to make sure that our children and youth that are experiencing homelessness, as well as their families, if they are living in families, are receiving referrals and other services related to that status. So you probably already know this, but I serve on the Michigan Interagency Council on Homelessness, the regional Midwest ICH as well, and the Homeless Policy Advisory Team. And I work with Jason very closely on the communications work group. Also serve on the steering committee and the board for the MHAB group. And I've met many of you at the homeless summits and the convenings that have taken place. So we work together a lot. And I hope that we both know either side of the issues, but we're going to share a lot of those today so that you can get familiar with our education piece. More likely, you know many of our regional grant coordinators who serve throughout the state on the COCs, your committees, and your work groups. So you may recognize some of the names on the list that I've shared of our regional grant coordinators. On that list, it indicates which counties they serve. So if you are working in a particular county, you can always find your McKinney Vento Homeless Education Grant Coordinator from that list. So here we are diving into the homeless education world. It's a mess, isn't it? Look at that. Abby had a slide that shared diving into the housing world, and it looks almost as messy as ours. The Department of Education hosts the program for this piece of the McKinney Vento law. The National Center for Homeless Education is located in South Carolina, and they are the federally funded technical assistance and training provider for all of the states on homeless education. Our National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth provides a lot of advocacy and other services and information for all of us around the country. And our newest partner is the Schoolhouse Connection, which was formed by some very long-time experts in homeless education. And they are doing webinars, policy action, scholarships for homeless youth, and all kinds of resources on their website for both sides of the field. Our newest partner is Kickstand, which is a small technology company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who are working with us to provide online training for all of the school district homeless education liaisons. We're also looking to expand that out into working with foster care liaisons and other school staff. We'll talk about that probably in another webinar down the road. So the McKinney Vento Act has been in existence for 30 years now, and our piece of the act is intended to remove barriers for the education of homeless children and youth. This is sort of what our parts look like. One big section is the education section. The other side of it is your housing section. So in 1987, they required states to have education coordinators for homeless children and youth. They required the districts to remove barriers, keeping kids in the same school for the same school year whenever it was possible. We got a whopping $4.5 million in funding that year. In 1990, they permitted us to share those funds with local districts, and they permitted school districts to have liaisons. In 1994, the liaisons were required for any district that wanted a subgrant with some funding. There was an anti-segregation policy where districts could not put all their homeless students into one class or one school building, or worse yet, form a separate school for those. There are still 3 counties in the U.S. that are allowed to do that because they had formed those particular kinds of schools in advance of this legislation, so they were grandfathered in. There were 4, and one of them has closed. They boosted our funding that year up to $30 million. And then in 2001, with the onset of No Child Left Behind, liaisons were required to be in all public school districts. Students who were experiencing homelessness were to be immediately enrolled in school and to stay in their school of origin throughout the whole school year whenever it was possible. Districts were required to provide transportation and mediate any disputes about which school that youth could attend. Boosted the funding again to $70 million. This is for the whole United States. Michigan gets still about $2 million per year to run the program and fund all the grants regionally. So in 2015, ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, was passed, and they added a few extra provisions. Now, under the School of Origin, preschools are also included, so preschoolers must be given the right for immediate enrollment and maintaining their school of origin, including transportation to that school of origin whenever it's in the child's best interest. They also added a provision to make sure that our liaisons in the districts are able to carry out their duties, that they're given the time and the training that's required. That means the professional development that we offer through the state office is mandated for education liaisons now. So we do work with districts to release those folks to do those educational pieces. Credit accrual is required if a student has to change schools. They are required to get partial credit or have opportunities for credit accrual to pick up anything that they've lost in the transfer due to homelessness. Counselors are now required, in addition to homeless liaisons, to inform homeless youth in high school that they're eligible as independent students to fill out their federal student aid application for college. And the counselors and liaisons are also required to help them do that. We've been boosted up now to $85 million in funding for the whole United States. Like I mentioned, Michigan gets about $2 million each year to provide all of the services we do through the grants to fund those, as well as our operations at the state level to train, identify, and monitor all of the district projects. So that's sort of where we are right now. Just in case anybody's not familiar, I suspect you all are, the education sections of the McKinney Vento Homeless Assistance Act assure that children can remain in their same school, even if they move, that they are immediately enrolled in a new school, with or without the records that are typically required. We have time added to our schedule to have liaisons assist the family or the youth in getting those residency required paperwork to turn into the schools. They are also required to provide transportation to that school of origin whenever it's in the child's best interest. They get every school service for which they qualify. Immediately when they're enrolled, students experiencing homelessness have the right to free school meals and snacks. They have the right to participate in all school activities, Title I academic support in particular, but also in clubs and teams and sporting teams at school, and we will support them by providing transportation to and from those activities, as well as required equipment, dress code, etc. And again, the dispute or appeal process for deciding where a youth goes to school, if they're eligible, is part of the requirements under the law. Now this is the big piece right here. This is where our pieces of the law differ a little bit. The education definition is broader than the HUD definition of homelessness, but we both have this phrase included. Any children or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence are included as the definition of homeless. The piece that we have different is the shared housing. If our families or youth are sharing the housing of other folks due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, they are included as homeless in the education definition. If they're living in motels, hotels, camping trailer parks, campgrounds, due to the lack of alternative adequate accommodations, they're considered homeless in the education definition. Obviously, if they're living in any kind of a shelter, they are considered homeless by both definitions. Up until December 10th of 2016, the McKinney Vento education definition also included those students who were awaiting foster care placement. And Michigan's definition of that was to include all of those kids who are in the first 6 months of a new foster placement. But when ESSA went into effect, it gave us until December 10th of 2016 to cut that off. Those students are now supported through the Title I programs in their public school districts. Let's talk a moment about unaccompanied homeless youth. When we talk about unaccompanied homeless youth in the education definition, it can be a student of any age who meets not only the McKinney Vento definition in terms of their living situation, but they're also not in the physical custody of a legal parent or guardian. So any student who meets both of those is considered an unaccompanied homeless youth. It is not just 18 and up, it can go down to any age. A lot of these kids become separated from their parents because there's a lack of living space in the doubled up situations that they're in. Some of them can't get into shelters because they're older boys and they usually will get separated at a shelter from the rest of the family. Sometimes shelter policies don't have room for families. It's rare to find a youth shelter for under 18 or a youth shelter, or excuse me, a family shelter that can fit everybody in a family. Now, a lot of these kids who are unaccompanied youth are fleeing from abuse at home. Between 20 and 50% have been sexually abused. 40 to 60% report physical abuse. And then there's a lot of family dysfunction that these kids are running from as well. 2/3 of the hotline callers report that at least one of their parents abuses drugs or alcohol. Many times there are mental health issues with the parents that force the kids into parenting roles, and it's difficult for them to maintain school and their own life while they're being parents to their siblings. Whoops. 1/3 of these kids identify as LGBTQ, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, and questioning group. Between 30 to 40% at a national level identify in that category. So we're talking about a whole lot of kids who are homeless and identify in that group. 10% of the currently female homeless teens are pregnant. And a lot of these kids are not enrolled in school. We still have questions about why the education definition and the HUD definition are so different, but just for the benefit of the folks that work in housing agencies, the definition was broadened for education because shelters are not in all the communities where schools are. There's not a lot of youth shelters that will take minors. Shelter demand always exceeds the supply that's available and requires shelter folks to turn away those in need. So many families and youth will not even approach a shelter. They're concerned about safety, they're concerned about the environment, they've got too many kids, they've got older male children, or there just isn't one in their area. I mentioned earlier the curfews or the limits of stay, participation in religious activities had been cited, as well as the separation of families with the older boys. Housing arrangements that are stable are not often found in our families that are experiencing homelessness. Even if they are doubled up with family or relatives, they cannot maintain a stable living arrangement. Sometimes what happens is that both families are made homeless because the apartment complex or the landlord finds out that there are too many people living in one doubled up household. A lot of our folks stay in the cheap little motels that are housed along expressways. Those particular kinds of motels are often havens for drugs and human trafficking, and they're really not safe for children. So let's talk for a moment about educational barriers for the children who are experiencing homelessness. High mobility, obviously, causes a lot of breaks and absences from school. These kids are often hungry, tired, stressed out. There's a lot of emotional trauma, depression, and anxiety that goes along with homelessness. The enrollment requirements are pretty stiff for most schools. Luckily, the law allows us to bypass those for initial periods and get those kids enrolled immediately. But those are requirements that the Liaison is needed to help to mediate, because that proof of residence, the guardianship papers, immunization records, school records, birth certificates, all of those things are a little complicated when you're running away from a desperate situation. The lack of transportation not only impacts families, but impacts kids getting to school, especially if they've moved to another area outside of their school of attendance. Lack of access to programs. We hear oftentimes that the children who have special needs are not in a district long enough to be evaluated for special education needs. The lack of school supplies, clothing, and other things necessary for school is a huge barrier. We can provide school supplies, clothing, school equipment like calculators and a variety of things that kids need for school as well through our grants. Jason, are we seeing any questions right now?
So far, not. It's been a very quiet group. So, as a reminder, if you do have questions, and as Pam said, maybe some of this is the background stuff you guys are familiar with, but If you do have
Yep.
questions, please use the questions box on the right-hand side of the control panel.
Great. Well, I'll shift into a little bit of data for a moment. Excuse me. Many students in Michigan are homeless, but I am thrilled to say that in the last couple of school years, we've seen drops in our final counts around the state. These are the unduplicated counts at the state level from all of Michigan's 900 plus public school districts. You can see the trend from 2007-8. It bounces up a lot, not only because of the economic setting that we had at that point, but because our department had not had a full-time coordinator in this job for 12 years. So when I started, I kind of bumped into these districts often. I would fill up email boxes. I would fill up voicemail boxes. I made sure that everybody knew they had to have a liaison and report their students. And back in those days, we were faxing paper back and forth to count homeless students. Thankfully, technology's come a long way since then. And we have gotten a lot of our districts on board. Our regional coordinators deserve tons of credit because they have been working since 2009 with our consortiums of grants that provide funds and services to all the districts in the area that they're serving. And so they get trained, they get support attending COC meetings and other community meetings. They get support posting those educational rights throughout the community. They are actually informing everyone of what a homeless student looks like and how to report them. And so now our numbers have bounced up to almost 44,000. And then now they're sliding down. This last year, 2016-17, we had just about 39,000 homeless students identified in the public schools. These numbers in the last several years also do include preschool kids that are in public school preschools or the Great Start Readiness Program, in addition to any Head Start programs that are operated by school districts. Many of them are operated by community action agencies, but we do have some that are in the school districts and get counted this way. Here's the big difference. This is where our kids live. Only about 21% of our homeless students are sheltered. Some are unsheltered, meaning that they don't stay in the same place every day. They either are not reporting it, they're on the streets, camping from one place to another. About 6.4% are in those little motels, but over 70% of our kids are in doubled up or shared housing situations. Nationally, the trend is closer to 74%. And that, as you probably already know, is category 3 of the HUD definition, considered to be at risk of homelessness. All right, we're ready to talk about the program at our regional and local levels, and I think Julie's up.
I believe Abby is first, but let me go through and check. Pam, if you could move on to that next slide. Pam, am I covering this for you? So sorry. If I am, I was unaware.
If you would, I'm going to grab a drink and blow my nose.
No problem. Okay, so the regional, let me restart that. The Michigan is divided into consortiums. This map shows what all of the consortiums in the state look like and how we are divided. There are 34 grants that cover 83 counties, which cover 908 school districts. And I believe that that covers all of the school districts in the state of Michigan. I don't have access to advance the slide.
Yeah, Pam. Pam's going to have to advance the slides. There we go.
No worries. All right. So every local school district is required to have a homeless liaison identified within their building. We're lucky in some school districts that our school districts are able to have building level point of contact, but that's not required. All that is required is that there is one identified liaison in every school district, and the liaison must be able to carry out the duties listed in the new guidance under the ESSA. In the ESSA, there are 10 specific duties that are required for a liaison to be able to carry out their guidance. The Department of Education, in addition, has said that a district should identify a person who has allocated sufficient time for the liaisons to be able to do their job effectively and to support them in fulfilling their duties. So it makes sure that they've got the time and ability to identify students, make sure that students are receiving the services and supports that they need, having the opportunity to work with community groups and others to do outreach and coordination for that. So that they have the full right to school. So they're enrolled, they're attending, and they have everything that they need to be successful within school. That they receive referrals to health, dental, mental health, housing, substance abuse, and other appropriate services as it is. So that's where some of our partnerships with the COCs come in handy, which you'll hear a little bit of Abby and I talk about a little bit more later. Making sure that they're eligible to and have the resources that they might need for preschool or other programs within the schools that they are eligible for. The liaisons are required to make sure that the parents and guardians have all of their educational rights covered, that their rights are posted in places in which that students or homeless students and homeless families may frequent, including school buildings, along with shelters, soup kitchens, public libraries, or other places in which parents and youth frequent, and that they must be posted in a manner that is understandable. So the National Center provides posters that are written in a very legal way, but we're required to kind of make sure that those are in forms in which our parents and our students can all understand. Liaisons are to make sure that disputes are mediated quickly and that students remain enrolled in attending while disputes are being resolved, and that parents and guardians have the access to parent-teacher conferences and any other parent thing that they are to have some parent engagement involved in as well. And that parents are informed of their rights for transportation back to the school of origin for their students. Liaisons are required to also be able to make sure that they get the professional development that they need to perform the duties, along with providing professional development to school staff at all levels, whether it be bus drivers, kitchen workers, superintendents, whatever that is, making sure that every single staff person in the district knows what McKinney Vento is and knows at least who to refer a family to if a homeless student comes into the district. And then also to have the understanding of unaccompanied youth, to know that a child who is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian and meets the definition of homeless has the right to immediately enroll in school and have the same opportunities that any other student within the district would have, even though that they don't have a parent or guardian to sign off for them, and to assist students who are going on to higher education to complete their FAFSA and have a verification letter that shows that they are in a homeless state so that they can file as an independent under FAFSA. If you are looking for your homeless liaison and you are unsure what that person is in your school district, you can go to either one of these links, preferably the first one in the time being until MDE is able to post the list to their website. This is the EEM. It's Educational Entity Master. It's through, it's a reporting system used for school districts. You just do a search, and under that search would be a quick search, which I believe is going to show us on our next screen here. And then from the quick search, you would go down and you would select your county that you are looking for, whether it be a public school district or a public school charter. From there, down at the very bottom of the screen, there is a spot to download. From the download page, you would find the list of homeless liaison category. Click that, click mailings and contacts, and then this screen will pop up for you, and you're able to see exactly who that person is for that district. I believe you are up, Abby.
It looks like it. Thanks for that nitty gritty, Pam and Julie, on McKinney Vento. It seems that we have many housing agencies and homeless service agencies that are on today for this webinar. And I am here today to talk a little bit about the Youth Housing Demonstration Project through the Housing of Urban Development that has recently been kind of a hot topic across the state, across the country, actually. I'm Abby, and I'm the grant coordinator for the Traverse Bay Area ISD, but also the district liaison for Traverse City Area Public Schools. When we started this process, there was a merge of our 4 COCs into a 10-county Northwest Michigan Continuum of Care. They did a lot of work around using the STAT, a central intake, so basically coordinated entry, and really looking at researching and being trained for adult homelessness through the coordinated entry system housing. There were a lot of gaps in that, with that being that it was only serving 18+ year olds, and you can see this is what we knew when things were just the way it was as a 10-county COC and our local Grand Traverse Area Continuum work group before the demonstration project kind of became a thing through HUD. And the prioritization of youth homelessness through HUD really kind of gave us the initial motivation to work closer with HUD, let's just say that. So what we know about our area here is that we're very, very rural. The little boy walking down the dirt road, that picture kind of maybe sums it up. There's maybe some more trees here, but it's not unlikely that there is a lot of rural area across our 2,000 square miles. So it's not unusual for young people to be very, very invisible, especially if they're not wanting to be seen. That is one thing we knew, is that you can go back. Can you go back? We knew at the time that there was no system in place for youth. If you were 18 to 24 years old in the adult coordinated entry system, they were not serving our continuum and our HARA were not serving anyone of that age range. They would call into the coordinated entry system, and there would be no place for them to go. They didn't want to house that age group because of maybe setting them up for failure. And so, not to mention, under the age of 18 was getting no service if they were experiencing any type of homelessness. So data that we collected and that we had was and still isn't great, but we know that we had to start somewhere. So McKinney Vento does report the largest number of homeless in our region here in the Traverse Bay area. And did we mention it's very rural? So the rural nature feeds the invisibility of our young people and our families. So we have, I cover 5 counties as a grant coordinator. It's Benzie, Antrim, Leelanau, Kalkaska, and Grand Traverse counties. That includes 20 school districts. We know across our region that 203 literally homeless are reported to HMIS. Those are the ones we know of, and we know that that data is fairly low because not all of our systems are on HMIS data systems. So we're not necessarily capturing who we need to be capturing there. There was 1,125 young people, and that's the age 3 to 20, so under the McKinney Vento definition, that were recognized by district liaisons across the 20 school districts for last year, 16-17. The trouble is, Between HMIS, as probably most of you know, and the McKinney Vento, kind of what Pam talked about a little bit, was that the definitions are different based on literally how homeless, but then McKinney Vento including at risk of homelessness and doubled up situations and couch surfing situations, and that there's possible overlapping in reporting and then lack of reporting for our data systems to be accurate. McKinney Vento doesn't collect the data the same way HMIS does. So, like I mentioned before, you can go ahead, Pam. Like I mentioned before, in 2014, there was a merge of the COCs for us here in our region. And instead of, a 5-county area or having 4 different work groups, they collaborated and became a 10-county continuum of care. Every county in that 10-county region, so that's 5 more counties than what I cover as the grant coordinator, but all 10 counties call into the HARA for central intake, SPDAT, which is required, and if they're literally homeless, then typically they get put on the voucher list. We have pretty good street outreach here, but lack of capacity there. So when we started talking about this, we really started to incorporate we wanted to incorporate a SPDAT that would take the youth age and bring them to a level playing field. One of the things I want to mention that is in 2016, I wanted to talk a little bit about the collaboration between McKinney Vento and the Continuum here. But one of the things that happened was, myself as grant coordinator and knowing that I wasn't going to get anywhere with youth that were homeless unless I got involved in the housing system, which in many ways, the housing system, and everybody kind of doesn't pay attention to because somebody else is taking care of that. I was in that same boat because I wanted the youth that I was working with just to be automatically housed once I sent them to a system. So in 2016, in 2014, I, as the regional grant coordinator, I took the chair position on the Homeless Youth Initiative, which is a small subcommittee work group of the Continuum of Care. So our Homeless Youth Initiative was basically a body of youth providers that came together and really brought to attention to the continuum about youth and youth homelessness and looking at prevention and how there's even young people under the age of 18 that are homeless and that need to be housed, even if it's temporary. We formed work groups and addressing different issues surrounding homeless youth. And in 2016, the HUD-NOFA came out in order for communities to become a youth demonstration project. We co-wrote that grant among the Homeless Youth Initiative members and the Continuum members. And we ended up becoming one of 10 communities that were chosen across the country. So there's about 140 applicants. There were 10 that were going to be chosen by HUD, 6 of which would be urban and 4 of which would be rural. And we were one of 4 rural communities, and actually the smallest one, we've come to find out, as a demonstration project. So what we're really working for is educating policy and educating HUD in regards to what rural homelessness looks like, and also really looking to bridge the definitions, but also to incorporate, and this has been a big one, but to incorporate an age range bridge between 14 and 24 years old. So the 14 to 24-year-olds are really looked at as youth among our system, and even now through the coordinated entry system for our adults. And they're being given, anyone under the age of 24 is being given the TAY SPDAT, which is the Transitional Age Youth SPDAT, through our HARA. So we're right in the beginning stages of making sure we have access points. Prior to this was really interesting, and one of the reasons that I advocate now for communities to have youth involvement and youth voice, because one of the things we did prior to even applying for the HUD-NOFA was we did some focus groups around our county. So you can see on the slide here, the locations were 4 of our 5 counties. We had 20 female, 14 male, and 1 transgender male. The ages were 15 through 19, and all of them were currently enrolled in high school. The summaries that we got from the focus groups, we asked them some particular questions. They were all asked the same questions. We asked them, where do youth sleep when they cannot be at home? And we got a whole slew of answers across the region regarding camping and parks and playgrounds and all sorts of things of where they may sleep when they're not home. What kinds of housing should be available for young adults that can't stay at home? So they started to talk about maybe everyone wanted an apartment by themselves, and then come to find out they were more open to maybe group living or long-term services to help them learn things as they became more independent. We asked, what are the reasons youth end up out of their home? So they talked about, as some of you probably already are aware, but neglectful parents, it's not my choice. Their sexual identity and sexual orientation plays into that. Sometimes the parents are homeless. Sometimes the co-parent that's in the household, a boyfriend, girlfriend, stepdad, stepmom are the problem, and so there's a lot of conflict. We also asked, what kinds of supports would you want if not living with a parent? They wanted to have trustworthy adults, an on-site area so that you could come and go as you please, and not to hold things that they maybe do wrong against them. So being able to help them even after they've maybe made some bad choices. We had a pretty decent variety of where youth have lived in the past year from that focus group collection, and many of them have lived between 3 to 6 places in the last year. So we knew that they're bouncing around so much, and it's really hard to identify them. One of the things we've been collaborating with our adult agencies, and let me tell you, this has been quite a process for me, because many of them are educated necessarily on working with youth. So we're really looking at interfacing the McKinney Vento programming here with housing agencies. Again, like I mentioned, the age ranges we have tried to drill into our adult agencies services at 14 to 24 are really the youth age that we need to be looking at that are really vulnerable and not having access to housing. We reviewed shelter practices to work to remove barriers. We're trying to use our youth shelter that we have here in the area in different capacities, so maybe we can incorporate some longer term, short-term transitional, but longer term housing for some youth that are most vulnerable and maybe some young parents. And then we're integrating the feedback from our youth advisory board. So I'm the advisor for our youth advisory board that was created for the projects that we were moving forward to, looking at housing, and they are part of all the looking at shelter rules, which they've reviewed and torn apart, and outreach practices. And then, the main thing here is to make a coordinated entry system that is specific for youth. Within our plan, we had to have a plan turned around to HUD in 6 months. So we found out in January that we were a HUD demonstration project area. And from then, really a whole lot of work that I could take days to talk about has occurred since then. We've had 6 months of really intensive weekly meetings, including many other meetings with different smaller work groups to get this plan together. The Youth Advisory Board is a huge piece. It's completely youth driven. And everything is brought back to the Youth Advisory Board, including the final plan, in order to make sure that it's meeting the needs of youth in our area. Our Youth Advisory Board has 5 solid members on it. Some members have come and gone, but they're ages 17 to 24 at this moment. And we're trying to figure out how to engage some more youth from our outer counties. This just makes it that they're leading. They're in leadership roles to help create and solidify what coordinated entry can look like for them. And they're equal partners at the table, so we're paying them. We have the ability to feed them most of the time, and they're really a part of our even bigger meetings that we have, including the leadership team, homeless youth initiative, and those types of things. Their voices are heard, and they make sure they're heard. So they're a very opinionated bunch, but fun to work with. And of course, they've experienced or are currently experiencing homelessness. So it's really helping us inform all parts of the plan as we move forward. The guiding principles, and I would just say this, this is kind of a generalized idea even for coordinated entry for adults, right? That it's adult driven, but that this now coordinated entry system for youth would be completely youth driven. There's permanent connections. They often voice to us that they would like somebody to follow them through all the pieces to the puzzle of their life so that they create long-lasting relationships. That it incorporates education and employment. Of course, I like that one because of the McKinney Vento piece. And then offering social and emotional well-being. And that's all for me. Julie, I think it's up to you again.
Thanks, Abby. So I'm going to go through my first couple slides. Tim, you can just go ahead and to the next one, and we'll explain who I am and a little bit about us in my third slide. So this data shows what the schools identified in the 2015-2016 school year in Wayne County. So Wayne County includes the city of Detroit. We identified about 7,800 students. You'll see that the majority of ours is doubled up as well. It's very similar to that state data for that. So just a little breakdown on that. And the next slide here will show us the number of youth that were identified in our PIT counts. So it's a summary of our PIT counts for the Detroit Continuum of Care and the Wayne Continuum of Care. It shows our numbers are quite smaller. You can see by the numbers there that we have a lot less youth identified within our HUD system than we do in our McKinney Vento system. So if you're looking at that bottom right chart, the total numbers of children under the age of 18 and then 18 to 24 are your third line down and your fourth line down. On that top left chart, you would be looking at the third line down and the bottom two lines in the upper portion of that chart to get the total numbers. But you can see too, just like Abby was talking about there being a big difference in what is in HMIS versus what is in our schools is here. And that too is very much because of that difference in the definition. Okay, and now to give you a little bit about what Wayne County looks like, and you'll see a little bit on this next slide. I believe there's one more slide here, on kind of who we are and what that looks like. So Wayne County is kind of the opposite of Abby's Continuum of Care, where we have two Continuum of Cares in the same county. The city of Detroit, Highland Park, and Hamtramck make up one COC, which is the Detroit Continuum of Care. And then all of the other 43 communities in Wayne County make up the other Continuum of Care, which is the Wayne Continuum of Care. I am in a unique role, whereas Abby is correct me if I'm wrong, a school district employee, and Pam is a employee of the Michigan Department of Education. I am an employee of our Community Action Agency. So I sit at the table, sit in the same room as our housing folks for Wayne County, and then have that partnership with the schools as the grant coordinator. So a little bit of a reverse role from many of the other programs across the state. So with that, we were able to write in these schools as a point of contact on the Wayne County's coordinated assessment and the HARA. We were able to make it so that the schools themselves are a point of contact by the referral process that's in place through McKinney Vento. We're working on setting up a very similar thing within the city of Detroit. We've just been talking about it for a while and trying to figure out the best ways to do that, and working with the Detroit Youth Task Force on homelessness to figure out the best ways to serve the youth within the city of Detroit, because the urban and suburban are quite different when you look at the two sets of youth populations. With being at the housing agency, and our agency is the lead agency for the Wayne County Continuum of Care, we have full participation in both the PIT and Project Homeless Connect. So we're able to connect our McKinney Vento families with those much more than many other districts, because we are part of the planning body for those. When you're looking at Wayne County and seeing that there's 2 continuum of cares and the number of youth, it plays an important role for the grant coordinators to be at that table. We're lucky in Wayne County that part of the Detroit Continuum of Care. One of the board members is actually the district liaison for Detroit Public School Community District, which is the largest district in the state. So they have that youth voice, that school voice right at the table. And then with the Out Wayne County Continuum of Care, with us being the lead agency, we can have that same voice in the Out Wayne as well. So I'll take this one. I think Pam is still sniffling over there. These are some of the resources that we have referenced today. Schoolhouse Connection is a newer organization that is a great resource for anything McKinney Vento. Has a great question and answer area for that as well. Hidden in plain sight. I'm sure many of you have seen through the American Promise of what that report looks like and how it shows how our youth are really truly hidden in plain sight, like Abby's picture showed. The National Center for Homeless Education is our training and technical assistance at the national level, has many resources in which have briefs on just about every topic you can think of, and online and self-paced trainings are available there as well for McKinney Vento. And the National Network for Youth is another great organization that is really working towards lobbying towards rights of youth and what that looks like.
Thanks, Julie. I'm back on as well. Any questions that we have, Jason?
So far, this has been a very quiet bunch. This is the quietest group we've ever had. We've never made it to the end of a session and not had a single question.
They're all having lunch, I think.
Perhaps. Well, so we do have one more poll question that we were going to put out there. So maybe we go ahead and do the poll, and while we're asking folks to respond to the poll, we don't remind them that they have the opportunity to ask questions if there's anything that caught their attention. But yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So yeah, so this is really kind of following up on the content that Julie, Abby, and Pam touched on. And with talking with them for planning for today's session, I also wanted to use this as a jumping off point. We being the coalition engaged with liaisons across the state to see if there's an interest from folks in the field about offering some additional resources that would be valuable for folks. So I see a lot of people voting for a lot of different things. So this is another question just to point out. It looks like a bunch of you have caught on to this already. But this is a multiple choice, multiple answer question. So there's no right or wrong one answer. You can select as many as you would like. So we just had a bunch more people vote. So let's maybe give another 15 or 20 seconds and see if we can catch anybody else. This is good information for us to have. And I will point out that I believe, Pam, you're giving a bit more in-depth session at the summit, and I believe Julie is also giving a session as well at the summit.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also am.
Oh, there we go.
At the summit.
Abby has one on her grant,
Okay,
youth
so
grant.
there we go. So all three of the panelists, but I believe you're each doing your own session as opposed to working together. So for those,
Correct. So we can give more detail on each of the things we've touched on today.
Exactly. Thank you, Pam. Yeah, I was just going to say, so for those of you who might be attending the summit next week, or I'm sorry, 2 weeks, 10 days, there might be an opportunity there to learn some more about some of these different programs. All right. The numbers have not moved now in about 30 seconds, so I'll go ahead and close the poll, share the results. Okay, so Abby, not surprisingly, you've got a lot of folks interested in what you guys are doing in Northwest. So once again, put a shout out for your session at the summit, and that might be an opportunity for people to learn in more detail about the work that you are doing up in the northwest part of the state.
That's great news.
Yeah, yeah. So 20% more information about the McKinney Vento grant coordinator roles and responsibilities. 13% about ESSA amendments to McKinney Vento Act with the focus on housing. Almost half of the folks want to learn more about unaccompanied youth. And so about a quarter of you said that you had other specific issues that you wanted to discuss with your regional coordinator. So I will remind you that one of the handouts that's available through the control panel is the directory of contact information. And so you can access that and download it. And
so you said the morning bus will be okay?
oh, we're getting some background microphone noise. If for some reason you're having problems downloading the attachments, I will make sure that they become available. I'll either send them out at the beginning of next week or make sure they're posted on the MICA website and can drive everybody to the URL where they're posted. But one way or the other, we will make them available early next week, following up from today's session. All right. So this is good information to have. And just as a reminder, summit sessions definitely would be next step. And I know that all of the panelists and myself have also talked about, depending on the feedback we got at the with this question, and I think also feedback from the summit about perhaps putting together some additional webinars to allow the panelists to go into more detail about their specific programs. So, yep, there is the contact information for Pam, Julie, and Abby, which I believe is also on the PDF that's available for downloading.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so let me just check one more time. Okay. Wow, a surprisingly quiet bunch. And now everybody, we're up against the 1 o'clock hour, so folks are thinking that they've got to get on to their next thing. But we've had no questions. So, Pam, Abby, or Julie, any final thoughts? Anything you want to share with folks before we close out the session?
Just feel free to reach out with any questions or specific kinds of situations you want to run by to me or either of these folks or other grant coordinators that are on the contact list, and we're happy to help you work through situations.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so, well, looks like we're at the end of the show, so still no questions. If folks have anything they need afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the presenters directly for more information. Otherwise, we are good, and I hope everybody has a splendid rest of your Friday afternoon and a great weekend. Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Hi, Rita. This is Jennifer from staff. Hi, I just